Hello and welcome to In Pursuit of. I'm continuing my conversation with Kartik Desai of Desai and Associates, and he is in pursuit of being an ethical Robin Hood. So welcome, Kartik.
Thank you.
And you might want to tell people what you actually do.
Well, I think it's a good analogy, except we try to do it, as you said, legally and ethically, transferring wealth from those who have it to those who need it through different forms of innovative finance.
So when you say innovative finance, how did you get into it? Because it's fairly new. What made you enter this?
So I have been doing this pretty much most of my career. I first got into this way back in 1998.
It wasn't called innovative finance then.
It was called impact investing. And that term was in fact coined by an organization known as the Rockefeller Foundation, which is with whom I interned. And then I moved to India in 2005. And after spending about 2 years at Merrill Lynch, India, in investment banking and private equity, I formally got into impact investing with a fund called Lok Capital in 2007. And then I also worked with a fund called Avishkar, which is, I think, India's largest fund in this space. And then, of course, I set up and I ran Asha Impact for about 7 or 8 years. So I've spent most of my career in this space. But I'd say I probably got into it because of my upbringing that I had. I grew up in between Delhi, Geneva, and New York City as a kid of a diplomat, my father, who was with the Indian government and then with the United Nations, and as the son of my mother, who, in addition to being a shawl collector, is also a sociologist and works with many NGOs. And when we were small, my younger brother Nandan and I had to spend our summer vacations, even as we lived in New York City, in India, traveling to different rural areas and spending a lot of time with NGOs. I remember being in a bonded labor camp at the border of, I think it was Andhra Pradesh and Maharashtra, when I was like 12 years old, and spending a whole week with these children who had been rescued from slavery. And, I have vivid memories of those experiences.
I can't even begin to imagine how you might have.
Well, what it does is it makes you attuned to the reality on the ground, right? That society needs help, and the economist aspect of it, which is my father, right? Which is the finance ministry, UN DESA, growing up around all these powerful and intellectual economists.
You're the blended guy.
That's right. That's right. How you take economics, the knowledge of wealth creation, capital markets, and a deep concern for society, and blend it. So that's always been something which was brewing in me.
Right.
And then, when I was in my early 20s and so on, something clicked. And then I've just been very fortunate because the industry also grew. So I've grown with the industry.
It's pretty commendable that your parents, let you travel around rural India when you were that young and allowed you to see.
Not let us, made us all alone, by the way. We would just be given an envelope of money and a list of relatives in different towns. This is before the era of mobile phones and all. But still, they
Wow.
told us, go for it.
That's pretty amazing. And very liberal, I must say.
That's true.
So, Kartik, tell me, when you talk about innovative finance, this is crucial for India's development, but that means we need to move fast on it, right? And that means the government needs to make shifts or changes in its policies or add new policies to it. So what's the way that can be done? Except hope for the government to do it on its own.
I'll answer this question in a very straightforward way. And I'll give credit to Mr. Jayant Sinha, who used to be the head of a fund called Omidyar Networks, one of India's largest impact investors. And then he became MOS Finance in early 2014 when the NDA took power. He said there's 2 things you need to do. One is high-level advocacy, educating them, making them aware of what is innovative finance, the power of it. The government wants to work with the private sector, so they want to unlock private capital. But they also have certain constraints, certain limitations, which are understandable. So we cannot treat the government as an enemy. Understanding their political compulsions and engaging with them to figure out solutions that are most appropriate, and educating them and making them aware. Writing op-eds, writing white papers, engaging on committees, and so on. The second is very, very technical, which is not done, which is the specificity. He's like, if you want certain regulations, modified or adjusted, you have to get right down to the specific comma or the dot or the I. You really have to get into the weeds of what exactly is required to be changed. And that requires detailed technical regulatory work in different areas. Like, as I mentioned earlier, for equity, it's SEBI regulations for the AIFs. For debt, reducing cost of capital for non-bank finance companies, it's working with the RBI. Things on taxation and subsidies are much bigger. That's an annual budget cycle, which requires engagement with the Ministry of Finance. Some are overall issues, which are separate. like the social stock exchange, or standalone issues, I should say, or the CSR law. And so one has to be very, very specific, which very few people are able to do. Also do high-level advocacy, and may I add, one has to be neutral about it, neutral and independent. So the government is aware of it, but it needs to be engaged with in a smart way. And the overall construct of Sarkar, Samaj, Bazar underpins all of this. If there isn't a respect by one pillar for the other two, then it's not going to work. And if I can give a framework for this Sarkar, Samaj, Bazar collaboration in the area of waste management, because we had Swachh Bharat mission, because we had carrots like the EPR regulation, extended producer responsibility, which rewards companies for recycling, and we had sticks like the National Green Tribunal giving fines to bulk waste generators, that's the policy construct, which suddenly the waste management, space began to be taken seriously. Social construct is very important. Young kids these days are encouraging their parents to recycle, to segregate at source. Now, without segregation, you have no waste management. And thirdly, the private capital. A fund like Asha invested in a startup called NEPRA. It does material recycling facilities to recycle. But you see how these three pieces came together. Only if the three work together does action happen.
I think it's so important that such stories are out there for people to, and these kind of collaborations are out there for people to consume. At the same time, the social sector distrusts the government because there's a lot of impositions and crackdowns. And because of that, there's a huge perception, that, impact organizations or NGOs are always up to something wrong. So what do you think about this?
Look, that's it's a tricky space, right? Because this is a question of perceptions, and it's also an issue of the practical reality. I believe in balance. So I believe that, of course, that NGOs have to be respected. They have to be compensated better. But that being said, we also have to hold NGOs to a standard. It is true that many NGOs are registered, but they're operating on paper. They don't have the same level of transparency or controls as corporations. So we have to accept it, some level of justification for the skepticism that the general society has towards NGOs. We don't want to sweep the whole NGO industry under the same brush, but let's just take financial capacity and financial transparency as a yardstick. Very few NGOs are declaring their financials like private corporations do. That's one of the reasons for the social stock exchange, to have a system of social audits, to have SEBI governing them. Now I can give you a ticker like you have in the stock market, and you can go punch in their ticker and their financials show up online at the snap of a button. Wow. And ultimately, we have to segregate between development work and political work. I think when you have an overlap of the two, it's a tricky space. The not-for-profits that we work with are focused on developmental activities, which are agriculture, education, healthcare, delivery of services to underserved people, or helping increase the income of those people. There are several organizations who work on activism, on a rights-based agenda, on research, and that's okay, but that's not direct delivery of services. So we have to also create that differentiation, particularly with respect to the restriction on foreign remittances coming into India from donors, which have made many NGOs struggle to raise capital. But here's the flip side of that. Why does reducing or turning off the foreign tap have to mean that your NGO shuts down? Where is the domestic capital? We have to ask, I'm not saying this to the NGOs, this is a question all of us have to ask ourselves as a nation, as a middle income country. We keep talking about our growth. All of us, who are white collar and who are educated are seeing our incomes grow manifold, over the decades. But yet, we don't have as much philanthropy or social investment in India, at least not in a structured way. It's not going into strategic philanthropy. So these are difficult questions to answer. So yes, I think the NGOs have a point when they feel aggrieved, and there's a trust deficit, and the government also needs to recognize and respect the hard efforts of the NGOs. And then we have to ask the financiers, where are you guys? There are a few, and one in particular who I'm extremely proud to call a mentor and who I really respect, Mr. Ashish Dhawan. There's others, Mr. Amit Chandra, Mrs. Rohini Nilekani, Mr. Azim Premji, and various others. But these are literally, you can count them on two hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need hundreds and hundreds of such people to step up and to use their wealth and their knowledge to support the not-for-profit sector like these folks are doing. Therein lies the solution.
So Kartik, social entrepreneurs, like you said, accountability is super important. If they're well informed in respects of finance, and if they're able to be transparent, then things would be better. Almost all entrepreneurs I know about like 3 funders. That's it. They don't even know how and where to approach them. So what can be done about that?
So firstly, I think this cobweb of being afraid about finance and economics has to go away. Science, as well as economics, is a lot simpler than humanities and social science. They're basic principles of supply and demand. So make the effort to learn about those principles and recognize that what you do in your work is 1,000 times more complex. Behavioral change, the nitty-gritties of how to deal with different stakeholders on the ground, and bring to bear the transformation of society. So don't be afraid of it. Learn the finance. And if you don't learn the finance, then you have no one else to blame.
Right.
Every startup has its own personality. As VCs, we look for the personality of the founder. Every investor has their own personality. It's not just money. Don't just look at them with dollar signs or rupee signs. Every investor has a different sector and a different psychology. And only by interacting with them will you get to learn about it and get to know them. And it's easy to figure out where they all hang out. These industry associations are a good place to start. Impact Investors Council. You'll see 50 impact funds listed there. The Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. You'll see dozens of foundations listed there. Intermediary organizations which work with not-for-profits like Dasra, like Edelgate Foundation, like the Nudge Institute. Intermediaries like the Blended Finance Corporation, like IPE Global, like Desai and Associates. Go to these conferences, and that's where you'll find lists of these investors. I would encourage entrepreneurs to think of this as more like a mental cobweb or gap and just like wipe it away. And realizing that just like you are trying to figure out which investor to get money from and who they are, they're trying to figure out which NGO or startup to give money to. Those are their targets. So just be more confident and be willing to dive in a little bit to the knowledge and know that what you're doing is 1,000 times harder than what they're doing. So always remember that. That's
a good one. So Kartik, tell me what have been the pivotal moments for you in this entire, I mean, like you clearly are so into this and,
No, so it's been a beautiful journey. Like I said, came back to India. I started with Lok after working at Merrill Lynch. And to me, I would list 4 pivot points. The first one was when I was at Lok. We were focused on rural microfinance. And I would go into the field and realize that what we think that we know about the rural world and low-income people in India may not be right. So we thought that they needed microfinance, solar lanterns, smokeless chulas, to name 3 products. When we did a survey to ask what people want, they wanted gold coins, they wanted motorcycles, they wanted mobile phones. So is it correct for me to force these so-called developmental products upon them, or to actually think in what they want? So that's the first pivot point, that really learn to listen to what people want. The second came when the microfinance crisis hit. Before urban microfinance existed, there was a sort of image that all development is rural. So the second key insight, our cities have almost half of our population, even more, in fact, if you consider the extended, urban periphery and peri-urban. And there's a tremendous amount of deprivation here. Secondly, that the deprivation is not just economic, but also sociological. The third realization was when I was at Avishkar, when I got back into impact investing, this notion of domestic capital versus foreign. That whilst the foreign capital is very welcome and we should be grateful, to the economies of the Western countries and Japan and others who have given us this development capital, it's high time that we as Indians, middle class, upper class, and the super wealthy especially, the wealthier you are, the greater the responsibility. There's absolutely no excuse. And we venerate these people, billionaires and startup founders in our hero worshiping culture. We should not, unless and until we actually see them giving a significant portion of their money back to development in a genuine way, not just for their own brand building. And the fourth, of course, was the shift from impact investing to blended finance. Impact investing is to a large extent now mainstream and part of venture capital. So that was a big realization I had, after several years in this industry. And therefore the shift into blended finance and to outcome-based finance to really try to solve the problems for the low-income people of this country. These are 4 of the important ones that shaped my journey.
With these pivot points, how would you say that you have transformed over the years?
One part of being on this journey is the intense deprivation that you sense, the sheer scale and the volume of the problems that India has. As my former boss Vikram Gandhi used to say, every problem in the world exists in India. But millions and millions of people are also working on the solutions, because you constantly are sort of battling uphill against concepts, against skepticism, and against income challenges, right? Because that's one of the biggest challenges in the social sector, is the ability to draw meaningful income from it.
Right.
So the inspiration, I think, of seeing just the sheer number of people who are working in the social sector, there's been this duality of feeling these enormous challenges, feeling like they'll never get resolved, right? The inspiration of seeing people working so much harder than you and realizing that I'm not even doing anything. I'm just enabling these people. They're the ones who barely earn an income, and they're working morning to night in these rural localities, helping other people. And ultimately, what cuts you through it is a sort of, dare I use the word, like a spiritual sort of a balance, of realizing that the best you can do is live your best every single day. So I think that's been the main transformation in me.
So what is that one change you would like to see in the social sector landscape of India?
I would like to see the social sector professionals compensated fairly. I honestly feel that they work just as hard, and the content of their work is way more difficult than people in corporate jobs. But that is not the expectation that we have as a society. We don't see it that way. I have so many stories I can tell you of people who are in the business world having very little respect for people in the social sector. And all of us together collectively as a society almost assume that this is lesser work. The truth is they do the same and they do more. Yes. And if they weren't doing what they would do, our society would implode. Even CSRs, and donors who give money to NGOs are only giving it to the programs. I've had people literally ask me a question that why does that NGO need to go on an offsite?
Yes.
The NGO needs to go on it more so that
the mental stress that they go through is just incredible. The NGOs.
It's not just unfair; it makes their work less effective.
Yes.
If you want them to succeed, you need management bandwidth. Why does a corporation need a CEO? The NGO needs it for the exact same reason. So the sooner we come to grips with that, and this is why social finance and the outcome finance and blended finance is so important, because it's not just trying to make capital efficient, which is make it as less as possible.
Absolutely.
But also effective. And if we do that, then I think the social sector can be in a much better place than it is today. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get there.
I'm hoping that will change too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure.
It was fun talking to you.
Likewise.